exactly. Yeah. But not in the rest of Mexico. Really? Yeah. People are very, very yes. I know. Yes. Exactly. I think academia is very relaxed, but in general, people are. Yes, I like that. I do like that. I'm very formal. When I went to again. No, not for me, but well, that's just in general. That's talk like ABC. Bueno, estoy muy contento de presentar a la invitada de hoy, la investigación. Ana Marmodoro, que tiene la Chair en la Universidad de Gorgia, así nos toca en el Reino Unido, y es miembro asociado de la Departamento de Filosofía de la Universidad de Gorgia también. Ana es especialista en metafísica antigua, sobre todo, también se la inspira especialmente. Y hoy nos va a presentar un trabajo muy interesante. Y bueno, también quería decirles que Ana está haciendo una estancia de investigación aquí en el instituto durante todo el semestre, hasta el 11 de diciembre, como parte del programa de la UNAM. Y bueno, pues está disponible para platicar con los temas de investigación, si le interesa. Y Fernanda nos va a hacer el favor de moderar la sesión y introducir a Ana. ¿Sí? Muchas gracias.
Buenas tardes a todos. Por estar aquí en la En esta ocasión contamos con la práctica de Ana Marmodoro de la Universidad de Gorgia, que va a presentar Gorgia, Helen, innocence. La dinámica de los finales son 50 minutos para su práctica. Después tenemos un pequeño resto de 10 minutos que empezamos para tener y recursos. Adelante.
Gracias. Thank you so much for having me here. It's just a fantastic philosophical environment, which I knew from some of the colleagues I've met in the past, but now I'm discovering more and more how much good philosophy you do here. So I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be here. As Edgar says, I am primarily a specialist in metaphysics, ancient and contemporary, but precisely because of that, I thought that I would try a new adventure, given that I'm in a new space with you, and do something that has to do with ethics and ancient ethics today. I want to talk about something that is very famous in antiquity, namely the story of Helen of Troy, from the perspective of the sophist Gorgias. So something that maybe you've not heard before, but I think for this reason may be enriching in relation to what you already know. I want to say that the methodology that I use to study ancient philosophy is to try to put the ancient thinkers in interaction or dialogue with the contemporary thinkers. And I'm a believer that this is important because it makes the ancient world part of our world. So ancient philosophy is not like archaeology. We don't find ideas in the ancients and then we put them on the shelf. We actually find ideas in the ancients and we relate these ideas as philosophers would do. So like dialoguing with these other great thinkers of the past. So to illustrate what I do, I also brought some flyers of the journal that I edit, where you can have free access to the journal and just see how we do things here. And here is an issue of the journal as well, if you want to explore it. So I know that some of you work already at this intersection between contemporary and ancient. So I heard Axel's paper last week, and that seemed to me just in the same spirit. So I thought you would enjoy knowing a little bit more about how I do things. But now, without further ado, there is a handout. The handout has two parts. So one part is the actual text of the encomium. It's literally only 4 pages, but I'm going to show you how interesting philosophically these 4 pages are. I don't know if there are enough copies. The second part of the handout is a brief presentation of my ideas, and then the main quotations that I will use to argue for my interpretation. So I want to ask who in this room has heard of Helen of Troy? At least the name, you know. Yeah, so we use it as an insult, basically, in Italian. Yeah, that's not, yeah. So unfortunately, this woman has a very negative reputation attached to her name. She is arguably the most infamous wrongdoer in classical antiquity. She was adulterous, and her adultery, far from remaining a private affair with her husband, was actually discussed in all ancient literature, including Homer and the tragedies like Euripides and so on and so forth. And she's presented as a wrongdoer. So someone who did something wrong, and the wrong she did had enormous consequences, namely the Trojan War, where so many heroes and innocent people died. So the case is pretty bad, okay? Helen did it, and what she did led to a tragedy, a war. But against this background, the sophist Gorgias, who lived around the 5th century before Christ, wrote an encomium. Now, listen, an encomium, not just a justification, a praise of Helen, right? Defending Helen. So the interesting thing is that Gorgias does not deny the facts. He says, yes, she did it. And yes, she did it, and the consequence was the war. And nevertheless, he argues that she's not morally blameworthy. So you can see that it's a real challenge if you want to defend this position, to show that this woman who did certain things with certain consequences, nevertheless, she was not to be blamed, to be considered morally responsible for what she did. And so the question that I want to put to you is, on which basis does Gorgias claim that Helen is not blameworthy from what she did? And now, more interestingly, on what understanding of moral values and moral judgments can he say what he says about Helen? And further, he not just say that Helen is not blameworthy, he wants to prove it. He wants a demonstration. He wants to give us a demonstration. So there is a lot to understand about this little text, philosophically speaking. So what I want to do here today is to examine the moral theory that emerges from Gorgias encomium. So I want to say that's really interesting moral theory that people have not yet understood as a moral theory. And secondly, I want to examine the method by which Gorgias proves the claim that Helen is innocent. And the reason why I find that interesting, the method, I think that it reveals an epistemology that is also very interesting. So these few pages that you have in your hands contain, I think, a moral theory and an epistemology that are both really interesting and not studied philosophically enough. And that's what I want to discuss with you. So with respect to the moral theory, I'm just giving you the main points of the interpretation, and then I'm going to give you the arguments. With respect to the moral theory, the first thing I want to argue is that Gorgias comes across us, the modern readers, as a proto-cognitivist. So I don't know if you are familiar with the word from contemporary philosophy, but basically cognitivists hold that statements containing moral predicates, such as when I claim Helen is innocent, express beliefs in the same way as other statements that contain descriptive predicates. Like when I say this room, I don't know, is 3 meters high. And so not only there is this parallelism between moral predicates and descriptive predicates, we can have beliefs that include either, but these beliefs and these statements reflecting these beliefs are apt for truth or falsity. So as much as we can say it's false that this ceiling is like 3 meters high, we can say it's true that Helen is innocent. So we can attach truth or falsity to these moral claims. And this is what the cognitivists say. And I think Gorgias is a cognitivist or a proto-cognitivist because he treats the moral statement that Helen is innocent, or that vice versa, Helen is blameworthy, as being demonstrably false. So he thinks he can demonstrate that there is a truth value attached to the statement Helen is blameworthy. So that's number one about the moral theory in the commune. But number two, while probably you've heard this in many contexts, a mainstream approach to the Greek sophists in general is to say that they are relativist about values, both moral and epistemic values. What I want to argue here is that Gorgias is a realist about moral values. Although it's not obvious to see why he's a realist, but I'm going to show you that I think he is a realist. I say that he's a realist because he holds that there are objective moral values that are literally out there in the world. In the situations the agent finds herself or himself. So that is to say that the external situations, the world where we live, it's value-laden. And it is the environment that is value-laden that motivates the agent to act in a certain way. And for this reason, I'm going to show you that there is another commonality between Gorgias and us modern thinkers. Gorgias is what we would call today a proto-situationist. Again, I do not know if you are familiar with the theory called situationism, but let me just say first why I think Gorgias is a situationist and then explain a bit more why. So Gorgias emphasizes many times in these few pages the possible circumstances that led Helen to leave her husband and go to Troy. And these situations range from Helen was under divine command, so the gods told her to go, or she was under physical coercion, so she was like forced to go, or she was sexually attracted to Paris, or even in love with Paris, or she was convinced by a persuasive speech. So Gorgias is giving these situations as the reasons why Helen did what she did. So the point is that the situations embody moral values that make Helen act in a certain way. Now, these values are not explicitly mentioned by Gorgias, but it's really easy to see what they are. So in the case of the gods, it would be respect for the god, that would be the value embodied in the situation. In the case of physical force, it would be self-preservation, the value embodied in the situation. In the case of love or erotic passion, it would be fulfillment, the value embodied in the situation. So Helen acts because of the situation she's in, and every situation that she's in embodies a value. So I think there are objective values out there that motivate her to do what she does. So the motivation for action comes from the situation that Helen is in. Now, why do I think that this is a version of what we today call situationism? Well, I will explain to you a bit more if you're not familiar already with what situationism is about. But situationism is a theory that explains, for example, Stanley Milgram's experimental findings. So Milgram is someone who performed experiments that show that people act, for example, cruelly in relation to other people just because they are in a certain situation that embodies authority, for example, and other values, and because of that, just because of that situation, they behave cruelly. So there is a value in the situation embodies authority, the person in the situation behaves cruelly, right? I want to say that there is a parallelism between how Helen behaves because of the situation she finds in and how people behave according to situationism. So this comparison not only helps us see, I think, why Gorgias has to be understood as a moral realist and not a relativist, because there are objective values embodied in the situation, but we also learn something about moral psychology by thinking this way. So the kind of moral psychology that Gorgias endorses in Commune. Because for Gorgias, as well as the modern situationist, the external circumstances which embody moral values that are causally impactful on the agent determine the behavior of the agent. So reflect on this for a moment. There seems to be no space no room for the agent's deliberation. So these people in the experiments of Milgram behave cruelly just because they're in that situation. Or Helen abandoned her husband just because she's in that situation. So we don't have here an agent of the Aristotelian kind who would just think about reasons for action. There is an agent that just responds almost mechanically to the situation they find themselves in. And that's very interesting because it gives us a moral psychology here, presupposed, I think, by Gorgias, where there is a very thin moral agent, you know, an agent that has nothing from the inside to contribute to the decision to behave in a certain way. So the behavior of the agent is all about the external world, but there is nothing from inside the agent that allows the agent to like have inner dispositions, have the capacity to think, you know, deliberate, and so on and so forth. So so that is my third point about moral theory that we can read in the Encomium. But then I even have a fourth one, which is the Encomium concludes with Gorgia saying, hey guys, you took me seriously, but that's like a plaything, you know, in Greek is a paignion, you know, it's a plaything. And, you know, what does it mean that this was plaything, you know, now that we got convinced about this interesting moral theory, why is it there was a joke or like a plaything, more precisely, for Gorgias? And I want to say that that Gorgias says that it's a plaything is really serious, okay? Because it's basically saying, look, guys, it was a piece of cake, as we say in English, to demonstrate that Helen is not blameworthy. So I tried to tell you in the beginning, it's very difficult to show that someone who did what she did and caused the Trojan War is actually innocent. We find it a challenge, but Gorgias does it at the end say, oh, you thought it was difficult? A game for children. You know? Why does he say that? Well, not because it was not easy to do what he did, but because we cannot treat seriously what he did. Because if we did treat it seriously, society would collapse, basically, because we can generalize the conclusions of the Encomium and then nobody would ever be responsible for what they did. So, you know, not just Greek society, society in general, nobody in no situation would be morally culpable. Right. So I think what Gorgias is saying here is just don't treat it seriously. I mean, it was not it's not that it was easy to do it, but once I did it, like, don't take it seriously. And in fact, like a toy for children, leave it behind. When you become adult moral agents, don't play with this thing anymore because the dangers are enormous. With respect to the type of moral theory where that we extract from the Encomium, I gave you my 4 main claims. And now I want to come to the second group of claims I want to make that are about the method by which Gorgias demonstrates what he does. So remember that Gorgias wants to demonstrate that Helen is not blameworthy. Now, here, I take him seriously, and I'm going to explain why. But in taking him seriously, I disagree with someone who has also written on this topic in a very different way. And she is Rachel Barney. I'm going to give you this quotation from Rachel, although it's not on the handout, because I think it's very interesting. So she thinks, like me, this piece of ancient philosophy is very interesting, very important. But she writes, the Encomium of Helen offers a tantalizing glimpse of a road not taken, of a way of philosophizing which is playful and rhetorical, slippery and self-undermining, and whose results are deliberately left open for the reader to decide. Its arguments and ideas influence Aristotle, but the spirit is closer to Derrida, and the combination is like nothing on earth. Okay, so the point here is that Barney thinks that there was like a junction at this point in the history of philosophy. We could have become, all of us, Derrida, or we could have become like Plato and Aristotle and analytic philosophers as we are. And she thinks that junction is just there with Gorgias, okay? And if Gorgias had won, you know, the battle, we would not be here doing analytic philosophy. But it's just that Gorgias and the sophists were kind of bullied and marginalized, and they're, by the bigger guys, the bigger brothers, Plato and Aristotle. But I disagree. I think that Gorgias is not an alternative way of doing philosophy. He's not someone who doesn't take himself seriously. I think he takes himself really seriously. And there's a lot of philosophical content here. So it's nothing like Derrida, for what I know about Derrida, which is very little, okay. And why I think there is something really important here. At the surface, maybe if you read that piece that I gave you, it is 4 pages. Yes, they are really brilliant, they're really fun to read, they feel like a joke, as it were. But this is just the surface. The content is deep. Remember, Gorgias thinks that there is a demonstrable fact of the matter as to whether Helen's flight to Troy is or is not morally blameworthy. So it's not that he's unsure, it's not he's undermining himself. He wants to show that there is a fact to the matter of whether she's innocent or not. So I don't think he's uncertain about, I don't think he leaves open his conclusions. But what is really interesting also is that he promised to demonstrate it, okay? He will give us a proof of his demonstration. But now, this proof, and in Greek, for those of you who are interested in the Greek, he says, "Deixai, I will demonstrate that Helen is not blameworthy." And how is going to do that? Doxa. So I'm going to demonstrate through opinion that she is not blameworthy. But now you understand that doxai are like unstable and fallible. These are opinions people have, and even Gorgias says this in the Encomium. So opinions are not stable, but I will demonstrate through opinion the fact that she's innocent, right? So again, we see Gorgias taking on a real challenge, in a demonstrative way. And I want to say that here we learn about a type of proof that, and now I hope I'm going to surprise you a little, not only we should consider sound, but even that we follow today in some context. So I'm going to another connection with modernity here. So the upshot for me is that in his method of demonstration that Helen is innocent, Gorgias does 2 things. On the one hand, is basically paradigm shifting in relation to his predecessors. He's doing something that everybody before him, particularly Parmenides, the big guy, would have found impossible to do. But secondly, once Gorgias introduces this type of demonstration, is very influential on his successors, and his way of demonstrating things becomes mainstream. So Gorgias is not this isolated sophist playing around with words. I think he's a real serious philosopher that has a lot to tell us. And the influence of his method of demonstration goes from it's anti-Parmenidean and anti-Platonic, but then influences Aristotle. And after Aristotle, basically all of us who are post-Aristotelian, with exceptions. I'm not saying the history of philosophy is just Gorgias, footnotes to Gorgias. But I'm not saying that much, but I'm saying that there is a lot there. So this is like the map of what I want to do, and you have a little summary at the beginning of the handout. But now I'm going into the details. So I want to start, and here I'm going to look at, you can look at T1. I want to start at the beginning of the Encomium, where Gorgias claims that we must honor the praiseworthy and blame the blameworthy. Namely, praise and blame have to be distributed appropriately in society. It's not like a free floating thing, someone deserves the good praise, someone deserves the blame. And you can see that in T1. So against this general claim is going to say, well, we should do this fairly, distribute praise and blame, and if we do it fairly, Helen does not deserve to be blamed. And you can say, you can see this in T2. So T2 and T1 and other bits of the text, I think gives us at least initial evidence for now that Gorgias is what I called a proto-cognitivist. So he thinks that there is a truth or falsity to be attached to moral claims, and is going to attach the truth to the claim that Helen is innocent, or to attach falsity to the claim that Helen is blameworthy, through reasoning, through logismon. And we'll come back to this later. So we need to distribute place and blame. It's wrong, it's forced to attach blame to Helen. Why? And now Gorgia begins by giving us a list of possible or likely causes for why Helen left her husband to go to Troy. And he does not prove, so he gives us 4 causes, 4 situations. You know, it doesn't prove that these are all the possible situations, but for the sake of argument, we can just think it's a good sample. And you can see the situations in T3. I already mentioned them, but the important fact here is that Gorgia argues that all these are external circumstances. So the reason why Helen left has to do with something external to Helen herself. These 4 situations, okay, that if any of these situations had happened, Helen would have been compelled to leave for Troy, right? So this happens, she has to go. One of the 4 happened, so she had to leave, okay? So and we understand here that she acted under compulsion, under obligation from the situation, as like literally, as I said before, like a moral automaton. So she has nothing inside, you know, there is nothing within the machine. There is the machine, that's the mechanical thing, you know, it's like, it's like this glass push to do something, you know, so there's nothing inside that she can use to think about why she's doing what she does. And this is the what I consider an invitation to a situationist interpretation of the incoming. Human behavior, now I'm generalizing, results from responses to the external circumstances in which the agent find themselves, instead of from internal, global and stable character traits. So like, let's change the example. You behave generously, not because you're a general person, but because you're in a situation that compels you to behave generously. You behave cruelly because you're in a situation that compels you to behave cruelly. So there's a lot to say about situationism, and I don't know how much you already know about this, but there are a couple of points that are really interesting. So according to situationists, the same situation elicits the same response in a variety of agents. So same situation, different people, same action. Or if you think that people have a stable behavior, then you change the situation a little and their behavior changes completely, okay? So I can spend a little bit of time talking about these experiments. I don't know if that would be useful, if people know, don't know. Do you know about, so these are experiments, I'll just say as quickly as I can to leave time for all the rest. But these are experiments that were initially developed post-Holocaust, you know, to explain why Germans behave like they did, you know, in relation to the Jewish. And so the most famous experimenter is Stanley Milgram in the 60s, and he at Yale performed many times this type of experiment. So he invites people, like imagine all of you are invited to participate in an experiment about learning, okay? And well, you're already a special group because you're philosophers, but the idea is that people from any range of socio-economical, cultural background, you go in the street, you get 10 people, whatever, you know, come and help me with this experiment. These people are told that they are helping a study on memory and learning. And they are brought together in a room, and they get, you know, the short stick, the long stick. So some of them happen to be the tester, and some of them happen to be the person tested. Of course, here's a trick. The person tested is always a confederate, right? But people don't know that. Now the instructions are, if you are the tester helping this study of memory, you have to inflict electrical voltage on the subject every time they make a mistake. So, you know, you begin like with 15 volts. That's a little painful, but the person makes a mistake, doesn't remember something, you do 15 volts. You ask again, the person doesn't remember, you go 30, you go 45, you go up to a point where the person suffers tremendous pain. If that was real, the person would suffer tremendous pain, okay? Now, in the experiment, the person that is testing does not see the person that is tested, and the electricity is not really going, okay? But, you know, the person testing hears these cries like, stop, you know, I have heart problems, going to die, I suffer tremendous pain. And this person hears all that, but just continues doing this horrible thing, you know, because they believe that this is helping an experiment on memory, you know, or a study on memory. And there is the professor there saying, you have to do this, because if you don't do it, I cannot learn, I cannot do this research, you know. So there is an authority figure that creates a situation whereby these guys, any guys, you know, just behave cruelly towards another human being just because they are in that situation. Now, what is really interesting, but just to give you the statistics, that when they repeated experiments many times, generally speaking, 2/3 of the people participating went all the way with the electricity to the point that would have harmed forever the other person if this were real. So 2/3 of these normal people behaved horrifically, okay? Like, and the point, the general point here is that it's not, the situation is one to put pressure on the idea that we have robust character traits. You know, it's not true. We think that I'm a kind person. You think, Fernanda, you're a kind person. Edgar is a super kind person, right? And then we go to this room, and no matter whether we think we're kind or not, 2/3 of us are going to behave like monsters, right? You know, so basically the situation is saying, well, it's a false belief that we have these character traits. We just respond to the situation. Now, the important thing is that, so what the person does is always due to the situation. And the situation embodies moral values. So this situation embodies the value of research, for example, on memory. But there are other things I could tell you that I'm not telling you to save time. Other experiments were done in a seminary. So people wanted to become priests and serve the church, right? You know, and still they behave cruelly just because they were asked to do things quickly, you know. So, you know, I can tell you more, but the upshot is that for every situation, the response of the agent depends on the situation rather than what the agent thinks their character is. But these situations are significant insofar as they embody moral values of one kind and the other. So now let's go a little closer to the Gorgias. So, for example, in the case of the Princeton seminary experiments, you know, people you could think are conflicted between two values. You know, the situation tells them, oh, you need to help this person in need, but the situation also tells them you have to be punctual to do what you're doing because you need to be professional because this is important. So there are two values embodied in the situation, but the situation makes salient one of the two values, and the person chooses the salient values. So there is no moral conflict inside. It's a situation that appears more prominently according to one value rather than the other, and the person acts accordingly. So we can understand Helen behaving just the same way. It's not that, you know, she forgot her husband. She knew that being faithful, well, maybe she did, but you know, maybe Paris was so handsome, you know, I mean, who knows? But she knew that, you know, it's in that society, the right thing to do is to be faithful to their husband, but she also had these other values, like the gods told her to do that. So, you know, she just followed the value that the situation made more prominent to her without inner moral conflict. She just went for the situation. So I hope I said enough here to show you why I think Gorgias is a moral realist. There is nothing subjective about this. It's just a situation out there. And all these people in the same situation would have behaved the same way. So there is nothing subjective to me, Fernanda, or Edgar, you know, that, or it's just all of us would, or the majority of us would behave in a certain way. So I will just so I have some definitions of relativism to contrast my interpretation of Gorgias with these relativist interpretations, but I will not go there for the sake of saving time, and will take you directly to the second big issue I want to talk about, namely the method by which Gorgias proves his moral theory and moral psychology, and why this is interesting in terms of epistemology. So I'm just going there now, and I'm going to ask you to look at T4. It's a really short line. Logos is the powerful ruler, right? So Gorgias holds that the power of logos, however we want to translate it, is powerful in the sense that it affects the soul by convincing this, by persuading the soul in an irresistible way. And you can see this in T5, for example. Speech, logos, is the persuader, compels the mind. So logos compels the mind. Well, I mean, obviously we want to ask what is logos and how is it that it compels the mind? And I ask you to look at T6 now, which is an iconic comparison that Gorgias gives us between logos and drugs. I mean, it's a really interesting modern conception of what speech can do. It can act on us like drugs, you know. I don't know, I mean, maybe it is politically incorrect, but think about propaganda in Russia, you know, maybe it is propaganda in Russia operates on the Russians as a drug, making them believe that, you know, all the Ukrainians are evil, and it's just logos persuading people of something with the same strength as if it was a drug on them. Logos is powerful like a drug, meaning, you know, if you take a drug, say a sleeping pill, you will sleep. If you hear a certain logos, you will obey to that logos. It's just as direct as that, according to Gorgias. And logos can make us do two things. It can prove the truth or deceive the soul. But in all cases, it does that by shaping the opinions in the soul itself. So T7 shows how the power of logos deceives, and T8 is more interesting because it shows how the power of logos proves the truth. So I'm going to concentrate on the power of logos to prove the truth. How does Gorgias in general, Gorgias or someone in general proves the truth through the power of logos? The key idea in my reading is that someone can prove the truth by bestowing reasoning on logos, so by logismon. Namely, it's possible to demonstrate the truth of something and persuade through logos other people of the truth of something by applying reasoning to their beliefs. This is the claim in full, okay? Now, how can one demonstrate truth by belief, as I was trying to tell you in the beginning? And that's really interesting. T9, Gorgias says, I shall prove that this is so, and I must prove it by belief. It's a, you know, I will prove it by belief. It's like a provocation. It's like meant to be a provocation. I'll prove it by belief. And commentators like McDowell, which have in the handout, thought that's really strange. There must be a text to be corrected here. Daniel is not here today, but if you look at the apparatus, maybe here. Like, we need to correct this line. There's something wrong going on here. Can't make sense of that. But I think there is nothing wrong there. As I said before, Gorgias is a proto-cognitivist. He thinks that moral statements have truth conditions, and he wants to prove that a certain moral statement about Helen is false, namely that she's blameworthy. And the question simply is, how do we prove that? So for the cognitivists, we get access to the world, and the facts in the world give us that truth value that we attach to the moral statement. And this is the strategy that Gorgias wants to follow too. But the question is how in his system we get access to how the world is in order to then attach truth value to the moral statement about Helen. And here is a really, really punchline, I think, that he says we have to do it by opinion. Well, why? Here I'm supplying something, okay, so it is, I'm supplying something to the text, there is nothing explicit there, but I think Gorgia thinks that opinion is the only means by which we can prove something. So we don't have direct access to the world, we have direct access to our beliefs about the world. So you see, that's kind of interesting epistemological statement to me to make. So for Gorgias, knowing the truth about Helen's innocence is having a certain set of opinions on which reasoning has been applied. So when I know that Gorgias, so that Helen is, sorry, not blameworthy, I know this not because I have access to the world, but I have access to certain beliefs to which reasoning has been applied. So I'm going quick now, but I want to make you appreciate here how shocking this must have been at that time. So remember Parmenides, like, you know, there is the way of opinion and the way of truth, and they're entirely different. There is no crossover, right? And here we have Gorgia say, the only way you get to truth is by opinion, because opinion is the only way you have access to reality. So obviously, there's kind of parricide here that we should think about. But in the line of the parricide, Plato too, in Republic 5, you know, you have the texts, T9 for Parmenides and T10 for Plato, would certainly not like the idea that, you know, you get beliefs and from beliefs you get to truth. I mean, obviously Plato has a lot more to say, but at least in the Republic, he would say, truth has a certain domain, sorry, knowledge has a certain domain and leads to truth, opinions have a certain domain, doesn't lead to truth. So Gorgias here is, I'm contextualizing Gorgias. So in relation to his predecessors, he's saying something really different, paradigm shift, I think, here. But then we philosophers today want to ask, so how do we go from beliefs that are slippery and unreliable to truth? And there are two possibilities. Again, I'm speaking to the contemporary philosophy people. So one could say, well, one could hold the correspondence theory of truth. So, you know, beliefs are true when they correspond to the facts in the world. But I don't think Gorgias thinks that, because it doesn't think we have direct access to the facts. Or you could have a coherentist theory of truth. So, you know, beliefs are truth when they are part of a coherent set of beliefs. And guess what? Socrates is the guy who taught that, right? So through the Socratic eclectic method, one can reach a coherent or more coherent set of beliefs that help us say, you know, what piety is, for example, and so on and so forth. So I think Gorgias here breaks with his like grandfather, you know, Parmenides and maybe Father Plato, but goes along with Socrates in his correspondence, in his coherentist theory of truth. But if this is his past, there is also his future, and this future is Aristotle. So I'm sorry, I'm just going really quickly to complete the paper, but connect what I just told you about Gorgias with what you already know about Aristotle. So you can look at T11. Aristotle thinks that we get to the truth via the endoxa, the reputable views that our predecessors have bestowed upon us. We reason upon them and we make progress towards solving problems or developing theories and so on and so forth. So I think I see Aristotle here as taking forward, you know, in a much deeper, maybe better way, you know, the initial idea of Gorgias. And we have to start from opinions to get what we want. Only that Aristotle differentiates the quality of opinions. So some opinions, the endox are the good ones, you know, we should work with them because they've already been tested. While Gorgias says, well, we start for whatever opinions people have, you know, and we try to make the most of them by reasoning. But again, you know, by reasoning upon opinions is the common aspect between Gorgias and Aristotle. I'll skip a little. I want to say that Gorgias is so imaginative in this dialogue, I mean, this encomium that even considers another possible world where we don't need to do all this work because we have there is omnipresence, infallibility. So we're all like God, we are omniscient. But then he says, no, let's not go that way. It's too easy, let's go the hard way. But I'm saying, I just put this on the table to tell you how much there is in this encomium. So I'm just going to wrap up now, and sorry, I've taken a long time, but so I want to say, I'm not the first person to find the encomium a really interesting text, and a lot of people have looked at it in different ways. Many have said that it's groundbreaking, in content, that has been very influential on Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and so on and so forth. And also we know that there are literally references to the encomium, quite hidden, but in Plato's Meno, for example, and in the Apology. So other people have seen how important the encomium is in our understanding of ancient thought. But I've tried to do two things here, not just showing you, where I think the Gorgia stands in relation to the constellation of moral theories and also epistemological theories of antiquity, but I've also tried to bring out, from a philosophical perspective, for like you, colleague philosophers, something interesting about what Gorgia says. And I want to say that this there are two areas in which, in these pages, we find important contributions to philosophy. One is the moral theory, moral psychology, and the other is the epistemology thing. So if I had more time, and that's one of my projects, not for today, but for the future, would be to show you that not only Gorgias is a proto-situationist. We know already that even Aristotle, in some sense, is a situationist. And then we know that there is contemporary situation. So what I would like to do, time permitting in future work, is to compare these three versions of situationism, so Gorgias, Aristotle, and John Doris and other people who are the contemporary people. So I think that there are three strands of situationism here. We could distinguish them and go deeper into the moral theory and the understanding of moral psychology and moral dispositions here. The Gorgian position perhaps is the more extreme because it seems that situation automatically action, and that makes me think of another research direction that would be interesting to explore. Naive perceptual realism, you just see what is out there. I think this is like a naive moral agent, situation action, with no filter, so to speak. So another interesting research could be done on the relation between perception and moral agency on the basis of the Gorgias encomium. But in relation to, so that is all about the moral theory. In relation to epistemology, I said that I think it's a really interesting thing that one could pursue again, in the history of philosophy and contemporary philosophy. If we make the premise, if we take the hypothesis that we don't have direct access to the world, even scientists don't, because they do it through measurement and hypotheses and so on, and theories and so on and so forth, then how do we work with the opinions, but we can call them beliefs, or hypotheses that we have about the world to reach truth. And I think here, you can see a really interesting story going from even Protagoras, Gorgias, Plato, Aristotle, and beyond. But how different are now we from these guys? I want to say probably not. And I'm going to conclude with this small comment on academia. I think in academia, we behave just like Gorgias in a sense. So how is it that we make progress? We have scientific academic opinion. Let's call them academic or scientific opinions, but they are opinions. These are like the way we think. What we think about the world. And what do we do to make progress? Well, we write a paper, we submit it to a journal, and we get people reasoning about our opinions, and helping us, no, or reasoning or not reasoning about our opinions. But if the system works, the idea is that, we subject our opinions to the reasoning by other people so that we get closer, let's say, to the truth, to peer review. So, and what do we achieve? Suppose that, suppose that peer review works well. What do we achieve, when we get our papers published, say, in Mind, well, we achieve a contribution to a trusted body of academic opinions, right? So we trust that body of opinions because that's gone through the reasoning of other people about it, but not because we finally think, okay, that paper in Mind or in Nature, if you're a scientist, really latched on to the world as it is. So I'm saying that, well, I want to invite you to think about the Gorgias and Commune. I think it's a brilliant piece of philosophy. And for me, found a lot of food for thought in this text, and I thought that it could be exciting in this group because you do different things and you're philosophers, but also interested in the classical, somebody interested in the classical world. And yeah, that's me. Muchas gracias. So correct my opinions now.
Pero tenemos un descanso de 10 minutos para café y
Siguiente. Ya dos. Sí, muy bien. Ya lo sabes, pero cristiano, ¿no?
Trying to make their own place. We're using the campus you guys know the secret she's already want to frame lock up to someone's head. Yes, you know, I just get to know people. So I don't do this. I really love, I think global makes us compare you. And I think that there is a bubble, English speaking bubble. So I was really excited how every week there is interesting book when I go to the really good community. I don't think so I just say thank you for having
This is just, I don't want to keep it, this is just for that we can use the, another, yeah, but I don't, yeah, especially because, we, before we had the seminar, it was all, we didn't stop. And then we just have a little break. So we
Lovely, that's good. Let's not get the sunshine, yeah. But thank you really for with me. Thank you all of you and congratulations for good things happening. And yeah, I thought today it's just something different because people know what I do. So I feel like it's so cool.
I was thinking we need Gorgia for the Malinche. You know the Malinche? Malinche is the woman who was like captured by the conquerors in the conquest. And she's become also a national insult because she's a traitor, right? And she's a beginner of the colonization and all that. And
So it's one of the bright
when you the weird coming from Malinche.
the modern, even in the current world, I think there are so many dimensions to this, somehow women are like a scapegoat, and this guy in a very male, alpha male society says, no, you're defending this woman,
And also by defending by empty care of every freedom, right?
But just think of like our the circumstances with like drugs on us where we cannot get this really real, you know, that's why I mean I didn't spend time very much on the experiments, but you know, in practicing practice, the horror of Nazi, for example, the horror that we see, you know,
That's what they say about limit situations. We cannot judge people because it's too compelling, right? Like when you want to survive
Yeah.
or
Yeah,
something
but
like
then the question is then what do we do? And one of the next questions that I didn't put in there is like what do we do as colleagues? But what do we do? Just go literally try to never be in bad situations.
yes, I'm sorry, more.
Yeah. Try, but it's now we have more opportunity. What do we do? You know, you say just stay at so that's kind of one question. Yeah.
Hola, Carmen, ¿cómo estás? Bien, gracias. Ah, mi estudiante. Bien, bien.
Pues ya está.
Sí, bueno, mira, corre solito.
Sí,
Sí.
sí, está bien.
Sí. Ay, papá me dijo que tu hermano trabaja en el campo, ¿o trabaja?
Ah,
Ajá.
Pablo lo conoce.
Es que papá trabaja en el campo, entonces me imagino.
Sí, pero no soy su persona preferida.
Ya, yo me encuentro en una situación familiar similar.
¿De verdad?
Sí, sí, sí.
Esto duró años.
Sí, yo estoy en lo mismo, como que no tiene.
Ah, por no, bienvenido. Sí, pero entonces no sé, no sé si
Es porque mi esposa comenzó a dar una clase en el campo, pero aunque ella es humanista, está en el, la contrataron para una clase en Derecho. Y quiero que conozca el departamento de legal, bueno, ella quiere hacerlo, ¿no? Porque está viendo cómo le gusta.
Ah, a ver, el problema lo tiene conmigo. Bueno, no, yo creo que tiene el problema con el médico, conmigo, pero
Ya.
su problema es conmigo, no con él. No creo que la trate como amiga.
No, por ahí, pero estoy intentando como ver si se puede tomar un café con alguien, así, entonces quizá no sea el canal de acuario, no hay problema.
Pero que puedes no, sí, el canal a través mío no va a validar.
Creo que no se conocen, creo que más bien sabe el otro plano.
Sí, por eso, o sea, no sabía que era por eso. Sí, ya llega un momento en el que tengo que explicar.
Ya, ya no basta de
Que sí, compartimos unos papás.
Entiendo totalmente. Bueno, ¿y cómo vas tus días de coordinadora? Felicidades, sí, ya sonríes más.
Tengo un enojo con la ex. No, el mío no cambió más fuerte.
No, tampoco ya. Pero que es más bien la actitud, no que más bien. Si lo afrontas con cierta actitud, pues.
Sí. No, ya muy de verdad. Pero no sé qué apoyo. Hola, Carmen. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Bien. Ah, estás Ah, entonces no, bueno, entonces te quiero mucho de A mí se me olvidan esas cosas. Sí, pero bueno, ¿cómo estás? Bien. De hecho, muy bien. Sí, sí, porque ya no convengo nada. Ya cada mi vida, pero es otra cosa. Esta es la primera semana. Ah, sí, pero mi verdad soy feliz. Ya, o sea,
¿Cuántos años?
es que fueron casi 7, es una barbaridad. La idea era que fueran 3, luego se acabó el periodo de la pandemia, entonces solo hay otros 3, y luego 8 meses se tardan en encontrar a Lucy. Y eso sí me preocupa mucho. El problema no es entrar, el problema es que te y sí, pero ya.
Ya el posgrado de
Queríamos que se quedara en la. Hubiera sido
¿Cuál es su posición?
¿Ale? Lo que pasa es que usted me va a tratar de estar del sur, ¿no? Hubiera sido buenísimo, además no creo que haya combinado. Poner cara que no se note que vas a decir que no, nada, eso es el clima. Y creo que o el otro realmente no dice, nada. Pero bueno, somos
Ay, buenos días, desde aquí, ¿cómo están?
Sí, me encanta California.
Okay.
Hola, hola,
Hola, Polet.
¿cómo están? Ah, perdón, ¿alguien dijo que su esposa estaba dando clases en el ITAM? ¿O no? ¿Nadie dijo eso? Perdón.
You can ask in Spanish and I can do my best to understand, and then if I don't, there is to help me.
¿Está Ricardo Mena?
Sí. Ricardo.
Oye, Ricardo.
No, Ricardo. Pero Ricardo.
¿Tú eres el que dijiste que tu esposa estaba trabajando en el ITAM?
Sí, Polet, si quieres te escribo y lo platicamos.
Ok, yo estuve trabajando 15 años ahí.
Ah, bien. Sí, te escribo.
Muy bien. Vamos a la sesión de preguntas. Empezamos con el doctor Ricardo, luego Claudia y tenemos después a Gustavo. Sí, ya.
I will answer in English. My question is roughly how convincing are the arguments given by Gorgia in defense of Helen? And so what I see is that his main reason is that however you understand the motivations for what she did, these motivations acted on her without her contribution, and they count all of them as cases of compulsion. No? So there is in fact this list that you cite, quote in passage T3, no? So either it was because of the wishes of chance, the purposes of the gods, and the decrees of necessity, no? Either one or the other, that she did what she did, or because she was seized by force, or persuaded by speeches, or captivated by love, no? So now, the first three reasons or possibilities that I find convincing if you believe, of course, in chance, ghosts, and necessity. No, if you believe in that, then yes, of course. I mean, if she was forced by that, then there is nothing to say she's blameless. But the other three, I don't find them very convincing because it is difficult, I think, for a Greek, but for us too, to accept that. Well, seed by force, of course, that's also a convincing case. But persuaded by speeches or captivated by love, that I find a bit less convincing because yes, she has this theory about logos, no, and logos is a powerful thing, but still you have to give assent, no, to what the speech says in order to act. You know, you can hear a speech that tells you to do something and not assent to that. I mean, you and you're free to assent or not. So if you do act by, I mean, if you do what the speech says, it's because you gave assent to the speech. So there, it's more difficult, I think, to argue for the idea that she's blameless. No? She didn't have to give her assent. And in the case of love, well, that is difficult too, unless you have this conception that is common, no, in Greek philosophy. So especially in the Platonists, no, who think that the soul is divided into parts, and that the part that has to do with this kind of desire and other desires of that kind is always difficult to dominate. And so someone can wish not to do something rationally and yet do it because he was overpowered by desire, which is rational one. And so, but still, I mean, you wouldn't say that an acrobatic is blameless, no? Because you could say, well, yes, of course, nowadays you cannot resist certain things, but you became that kind of person because you wanted to, which is what Aristotle says, no, against this kind of argument. So even though you're no longer able to overpower the desire for love or for food, or there was a time when you could have acted otherwise and you could have resisted, no, this kind of desire. So for a Greek, no, and for the audience of conscience, who, I mean, would they find convincing his defense of Helen, especially in this situation?
Okay. This is a really good question, Ricardo. So can I, well, just for clarification, general clarification, the list that you see in that passage is normally understood by commentators to cover 4 cases, although there are more than 4 things mentioned. So, but I've not gone into the details. But I think you single out persuasion by speech and love. So speech, I think that what Gorgia thinks here is simply that speech acts like a drug. So it compels us to do something as much as a sleeping pill would compel us to sleep. And this is a very, if you want, physicalist understanding of the human psyche. So it's a mechanical process, like literally, like I drop the glass breaks, like in physical causation. It seems just the same. So one could think that there is a physicalist account of the mind that or physicalist reductive account of the mental that is implicit here, and that would help making sense of why speech acts this way. So the reason why I didn't say it explicitly is that I think we just don't have any hint in the text. But I think to make the case stronger on behalf of Gorgias, one could say, well, it's just reducing the mental to the physical. And then, lots of psychologists even today think that, you think that you're making a decision, but actually it's your neurons firing and it's all mechanical, when it's just, so I'm thinking that here I could defend Gorgia saying is having a physicalist account of the mental that psychologists today find plausible, and then more anecdotically, I think we have seen the power of words and speeches in million ways today, as I say, think of Russian propaganda or think of the Nazis or whatever, or other contexts that are less sad than these ones. So I think that can be defended that way. And I think love is a more interesting case because it depends on how we understand love. So our modern understanding of love, I think, would include a dimension of emotions, and feelings and all that. But I think here, and that's why also in the paper, I sometimes paraphrase love as erotic attraction or sexual attraction. Again, I think we should supply a physicalist understanding of love. So it's not love as like in romantic, platonic, I don't know what we can call it, love. It's sex, in the sense that, you see something beautiful and you just, your hormones respond in a certain way. And that, I think, would then support why it is compulsion. So I think both with speech and love, although Gorgias is not explicit, his case would be stronger if he had some physicalist assumptions about feelings and about speeches. You see, and he doesn't make them explicit, but at the same time, there is a lot that is not explicit here, and we could grant him that. But you see, the thing that I want to distance myself from is the suggestion that there is a moral conflict. Gorgias here is basically saying that there is nothing like akresia. He's totally denying the possibility of akresia. There is no inner parts of the soul or inner faculties in the soul. There is no rationality versus appetite. It's all hollow inside, and that's why she doesn't have to think about what to do. She can't, because there is no reason versus desire. There's only a physicalist response. Okay. Otherwise, not an yes.
Thanks, Anna, a lot for your presentation. I just wanted to push a bit more on your interpretation of Gorgias more broadly. In relation to two claims that you make. One being more epistemological, the other one more ontological. Being one, they claim that for Gorgias there are truth conditions, for moral judgments. And the other, the thesis of the moral realism. There are moral facts out there in the world. That in relation mainly to some traditional interpretations and other texts by Gorgias. How does your interpretation of the encomium relate to those? For example, I'm thinking in Sectus Empiricus, in Adversus Mathematicus, when he talks about Protagoras and Gorgias, he relates them both to some sorts of relativism. In Protagoras, it's more materialistic. And he says about Gorgias that he suppresses literally to criterion thessaletheias, generally speaking. So if one believes the interpretation of Sextus, there is no truth conditions whatsoever, because Gorgias is a tremendous relativist. And in the other, that more epistemology related thing, and the other thing is, how do you think in Gorgias himself does your interpretation of the encomium relate to the peritume ontos? Because their one claim is, well, nothing is, not being, and being, both are suppressed. And even if something were the case, I could not communicate it even. Well, there are more stages, but I could not communicate it. So that implies some contradictory state of affairs of epistemologically and ontological. So that's my question.
Yeah, so that's great, Claudio. I'll probably talk to you about the Saxus Empiricus also some other time. But here I want to say, so how does what Gorgia says here relate not only to what others say about Gorgias, namely, for example, Saxus Empiricus, but what he says himself, say, like in Palamedes, defense of Palamedes, for example. So that's a fair question. So it depends on what we understand by truth, because if there are two theories of truth that I mentioned, correspondentist and coherentist theory of truth. So one could say that Saxus is right in thinking that Gorgias does not endorse a correspondentist theory of truth. So there is nothing out there that can make true that claim. So in that sense, it suppresses truth conditions by suppressing the conditions, our access to the conditions in the world that would make true the claim. But the other understanding is that the truth conditions are all only about relations among propositions, and so that's what I think Gorgias has in mind in the encomium, that this claim about Helen is made true by it's like fitting in these other beliefs that we have operated on with reasoning. So we need to disambiguate truth, but I'm happy to talk to you more about this. I think you make good points. You also said something really interesting about the before the May on. What else did you say? Sorry, did I answer your first point in full, or you want a bit more on the first point?
My first point was the truth condition.
And you're happy with my answer
yes,
at the moment,
yes,
okay? We can talk more. The second point.
The other one was how internally in Gorgias himself, your interpretation of
yes. So here, for the first part, also the second point, maybe I want to say this. Remember that this is a pygneon, so it's a plating, and a sense in which it is a plating is that it's a toy that when we become adults we leave behind, because because seriously speaking, it is a really dangerous toy. There is a lot of play of words there, but it could be thinking here, look, I showed you all this. Hey, I'm brilliant, I've done that, but leave it behind, because if you keep playing with this, it's like playing with fire. Do you see what I'm saying? So it could be that like mission accomplished, I proved that, but I'm also telling you, move on, and then what he says in other places is like he's moving on to something else, other theories, other thoughts. So, that's a possibility to address your point, that this is not, Gorgias is not committed to this to cure forever, beyond having, exactly, beyond having show you. And the plaything, I think, is a sign that, look, it's like it's self-contained. And that, I think, also goes a little bit towards answering the first point, that maybe there are no truth conditions for Gorgias, but here he has just played this game, of showing how it works and how dangerous it is if we play this game. But thank you, these were really good points, yeah. Hi.
Thank you for the talk, super interesting.
Thank you.
But I have a worry about the retribution of situationism.
That's good, yeah, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
My worry is that situationism is not only the idea that we make choices based on the situation, right? But I think that that's something that we find in Stanley Milgrams and all these social psychologists. It's an idea of not what we find in some other contemporary populations, such as Marmodoro, Rupert Sharma, which is the attack on the idea of there being a stable character.
Yeah.
That there is such thing as a character. Yeah. So, and it's basically an attack on virtual ethics.
Yes.
So I understand why you attribute this situation is not gorgeous. In the first sense, that we make moral judgments based on the situation. But I don't see the other part.
Yeah.
The attack on the idea of moral character and there being virtues based on that moral character.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether it is really situationism that we're aiming at, and not some other form of, I don't know, contextualism maybe, or even some form of moral particularism.
Yeah.
No, it was it's very interesting and very good. And so I want to say that two things. First of all, I was saying that Gorgias is a proto-situationist. So it's not exactly a situationist in the sense of the situationist of today, like you were saying, Harman and John Doris. And it's not even a situationist, you know, and you're right, because they attack the idea that we have stable and global character traits, and basically they attack virtue ethics, exactly like you say. And you're saying, but look, Gorgias doesn't do that. And I think it's fair, he doesn't do that, but in a sense, because virtue ethics had not been invented yet. So in the final part of my talk, I was saying that, you know, in a bigger project, I think it would be good to distinguish the specific proto-situationism of Gorgias from, you know, an Aristotelian position where you have the dispositions, but also the situation, from the contemporary situationists where you have no stable and global character traits and you respond to situations. So I think we agree that it's not exactly the same as contemporary situationism. But you see, and it's not an attack on virtue ethics, but I wanted to use this as a tool for understanding what Gorgias says. So as a comparison with contemporary theory that helps us revealing what Gorgias is saying. Now you offer some alternatives. You said, well, why don't we think contextualism, for example, or particularism? And these are other possibilities. And I also was imagining in my mind, could there be another moral theory that would fit this text better? But you know why I chose situationism as the one that seems to me the closest? All this emphasis on the situation, but also the connectivity with what's going to happen afterwards. So imagine the story the other way around. We don't have virtue ethics first. We have Gorgias, proto-situationism first, and then there is Aristotle's reaction. Oh no, we need the dispositions, and then there is the rest of the story. So you see, it seemed to me coherent to go for situationism rather than, say, particularism or any other option, because then we can read Aristotle as responding to some sort of view like this. No, it's not that, and Plato, it's not that the moral agent has nothing inside. The moral agent has parts of the soul, and the moral agent has moral dispositions, and so on and so forth. So I hope this helps seeing what I'm saying. But it's really, it's a really fair point that you're making. Yes. Yes.
Pasamos ahora a Miguel Ángel, por favor.
Yes, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I'm trying to figure out the interest of Gorgias' position for the debate, because it's not completely clear.
Yeah, tell me more.
So it seems to be, here's what I understood that probably is Adora said, given a certain situation, which are external elements, but also internal, which are part of the situation, a set of beliefs. One sentence of the form, pressing the button by John is either correct or incorrect. We want to rescue them. Now, what is not clear to me is what are those sets of beliefs, or what are the reasons that Gorgias gives for selecting, what are the differences in the belief states that yield correctness or incorrectness. Adequacy or inadequacy. And without that, I don't have a theory, any moral theory. And something that might be helpful that I was hearing at the end is your comparison with the case of perception, where we have naive realism. So one of the problems for naive realism, I'm not saying that that's a killing problem, and there are a lot of literature about that, is the problem of illusion. And there seem to be an analogy between illusion and wrongdoing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, I know some of the solutions for an idealist. I don't know how to match in this debate to get something that looks similar to a plausible ethical theory.
Yeah, that's good. So I left it implicit, but if you ask me which sets of belief are in play here that we apply reasoning to come to determine whether it is true or false that Helen is blameworthy, I assume this to be the kind of current beliefs that the Greeks at that time would have, which are a little bit mentioned at the beginning of the encomium, like, the city is good if, I don't know, I think this was T1 here. There are some things that are mentioned as standard Greek beliefs of that time. So I thought this...
And it's not situationalism, because I can have beliefs that are different from those that everybody has, despite of being true, because there is a correspondence, blah, 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 blah. And it's not only the situation.
I know, but you see, the beliefs are what determines the truth value, but not the behavior. The behavior is determined by the situation. The beliefs determine the truth value. So there are different things happening.
Difference is the beliefs.
Yeah.
So Gustavo has some beliefs,
Yeah.
other beliefs, some of mine, some of his maths people believe, but mine not.
Yeah.
And in the same situation, so the only difference in the belief, we behave differently. I want to determine which one is right and which one is wrong.
Yes, but you're assuming that in your experiment that the beliefs determine the action. And that's not what I'm saying. The situation determines the action, but the beliefs, you may have different beliefs, but like we sit together, we reason about the beliefs, and then on the basis of reasoning on the beliefs that we have on the table, we come to attaching truth value to a certain claim, like Helen is not blameworthy. And that is the similarity with, you write a paper on Plato, Gustavo write a paper on Plato, we all go through peer review, I don't know, I write a paper and you are my reviewers, and you review my beliefs in relation to something that is truth-tapped, but it's not beliefs or opinions that lead to action. So that's what I want to say. No, okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry about that.
If there is time.
Yeah.
Esteban, por favor.
Gracias. I really like what you're talking about. Very interesting. I was thinking about this issue about the thin moral agent.
Yes.
How thin is the moral agent? Is that all moral agents are thin? Because I see a certain risk here.
Yeah.
If all moral agents are thin, maybe they may be so thin that they're not moral. In other words, if there's always an explanation that will justify any course of action, then there's no immorality in human behavior.
Absolutely.
So in what sense can we be moral realists? I mean, we could be moral realists and just say humans are never immoral, but then how could they be praiseworthy if they are not blameworthy? Are we outside of the realm as human beings of morality under these conditions?
Yeah, that's very good. Okay.
And a little minor point about truth and coherence. I mean, I just wonder if there's an extra thing that can be discussed. There is a distinction when thinking about this distinction between coherence as a test for truth. Coherence is part of the nature of the justification for believing that something is true, and coherence as the nature of truth. That's it, as a metaphysics of truth. Because making that distinction, I think that then we can reassess or not whether Socrates is a coherent about the metaphysics of truth.
That's an excellent point. So thank you for that, Esteban. On the second point on coherentism and truth, in the written version of the paper, I thought a little more about it because I mean, at least in relation to Socrates, there is a little bit of a debate. But the problem is that with Gorgias, we have so little that it's difficult to map that debate onto the Gorgias. But that's not to say that should not be tried. So I take your point, and I had started doing a little bit of that, but I want to do a bit more. I think you touched on an important thing there. So thank you. The other point is super interesting. So I wanted to say that I think all agents are thin, and therefore Paris is thin, and Agamemnon is thin. So when I'm saying Paris could be thought as blameworthy because he stole someone else's wife, and then Agamemnon started the war. So if you project this story outwards, basically all these guys, heroes as well, in the Greek tradition, are thin. And I think that's precisely what makes Gorgia step back and say, but look, this is a Pygmalion, right? Because if you take it seriously, there is no moral responsibility to be attached to anything. So I don't know now, and that's my answer, but then can I just speculate a little bit in relation to what you're saying, which I think is interesting. So I was trying to say, if it can be defended, that there are objective moral values embodied in situations in the world, but there is no moral responsibility. So, that's a space that I was trying to open. Like, yes, the world has values, but we don't get to be responsible for choosing one value over the other. So, there is good and evil in the world, but whether we go one way or the other, it's not our responsibility. So I hope that.
Yeah. Like if I'm struck by
yeah.
It's not the fault of the cloud.
Exactly right. So again, one very interesting coda there. It's interesting that connects with Ricardo. It's a really naturalistic type of approach, physicalist approach to the human condition. Only that I think this is little to be able to have a theory, but a lot of the hints we get here is that I like your comparison. It seems like reducing humanity to nature, and physical causes and what Aristotle called efficient causation. It's very interesting. But I wish this text was longer. It doesn't tell us enough. It just teases us with it. Hi, Ricardo.
So my question is fairly related to Gustavo's.
Yeah.
So a disclaimer, I haven't read Situationists, but it seems to me that the conclusion we should draw from the psychological experiments is fairly different, substantially different from the conclusion that Georgas wants to draw. Because so in the experiments, we get that 2/3 of the subjects do the thing.
Yeah.
And as such, it seems to me that the conclusion we should draw is that, we are all much more likely to do blameworthy things than we would like to think. Whereas if I understood the Jürgen Herrmann correctly, he wants to claim that anyone who were to be placed in Helen's position would do the same thing she did.
Yeah.
And then there the conclusion that we're not morally worthy seems blameworthy seems fairly reasonable. So
I think your point is very good. Sorry, I just want to take some as much time as possible to respond because I got to your point. I think it's very interesting. First of all, there is a bias in the experiments because basically we have tested what has been tested is mostly bad behavior, right? Rather than say being generous. Although there are some experiments that are incredibly, you would find them ridiculous. But in San Francisco, so people find they have to make, they're asked to make a telephone call from a public phone booth, which doesn't exist anymore. Basically, they go in. Half of them finds a dime, so $50 in the booth, and half of them doesn't find it. Then they walk out, and there is a woman working, and she drops a lot of papers. And guess what? The people who find $50 tend to help her, and the people who don't find $50 walk on, But I mean, your point is that. Look, I think, Gustavo, and you are right. There are these similarities between modern situationism and Gorgias situationism. But I think Gorgias could explain the 1/3 that doesn't do the thing in the following sense. It's still all about situations, only that every situation in reality is complex, right? So there are lots of values embodied in the situation, and some of them are going to be more salient, maybe even more perceptible to the person in the situation. And so for the 1/3 that didn't do the bad thing, there was something else that was salient in the situation, and they went for that. So I think that is not a counter argument to say, look, if the situation always determines the behavior, like Gorgias thinks, everybody should have done the same thing in that experiment, because the situation always determines what we do, but every situation has multiple factors. And some factors to some people just jump out more, like visually, and that goes back to the perception comparison, maybe, both you and I look out and I don't know, the green jumps to my eyes, and the pink of the flowers jumps to your eyes. And then each of us responds automatically to what the situation has made more salient. So I'm happy to try to say more, and I want to say more about these kinds of situationism. I want to even say that even Aristotle is a kind of situationist, but we have to be very careful about distinguishing them. But here was a tool, a situation for understanding this moral theory that everybody just says is relativism. I think that can't be right, you know, it seems to me. That was a very good point, thank you.
No, yeah, thank you.
We'll talk more, okay, thank you.
Yes, no, this was great. I learned a lot.
You're so kind here, you know, like the first thing people say is you're wrong.
That's all. I'm gonna go to the last part, right?
Yeah.
I have two questions. The first is that in the end, I didn't understand in what sense this is approved by DOXA.
Yeah, yeah.
And there seems to be a tension between your assertion that this is a good argument. And I'm like, yeah, of course, I follow it. So and it is an argument by DOXA. And I'm like, what did DOXA come in? It's just a normal argument. I just didn't see it was just an argument by DOXA, not just a normal good argument. I mean, every premise seems to be like the kind of thing analytic philosophers do about the very concept of blameworthiness, about the necessary conditions for assigning blame on the possibility. It's like a very, very natural, normal philosophical argument, right? So I never understood in what sense this is an argument by DOXA. I understood why Gorgia believes that DOXA is the kind of the foundation of knowledge, like that. But I didn't see how it played on the argument, and therefore I cannot evaluate your final claim that this is what we still do. Because yes, I can see how this is what we still do. That we still try to, at most possible, use premises that are kind of analytic, that are about the very concept of moral concepts. But I don't see how you want to conclude from that arguments from opinion are still very much the way we do philosophy.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I mean, I also think this requires more work, and what is difficult is to understand if there is one coherent position that comes out of the encomium, or there are two positions. Like Helen is not blameworthy because of this moral theory and moral psychology that I reconstruct on his behalf. And then but there is also this second strand. So you can take it as it's a second strand in the encomium that is, let's make fun of I don't know, Parmenides and some bits of Plato and so on and so forth, playing with this demonstration by belief. So the way I presented the paper, and you were absolutely perceptive about this, Axel, was to present it as a coherent story. But I myself don't know what is it that exactly he wants to prove by DOXA, because we get to the conclusion that Helen is not blameworthy through the reasoning that, as you say, has all these premises. But then here was my speculation, which I didn't make perhaps so clear, and to conjoin the two parts. How does he persuade? Because he begins by saying, I'll persuade people that she's innocent. Well, I'll persuade them of the conclusion that we reach by reasoning through analytic premises via DOXA. So I have established that Helen is not blameworthy, but now I have to do the job of persuading these people that she's not blameworthy. And therefore, I will demonstrate to them that she's not blameworthy by manipulating their beliefs, right? So in that sense, then we have to play a little around with this meaning of demonstration, and why did he choose demonstration if it means persuasion? But then I thought, again, it's my speculation, but then I thought maybe we have to allow him the use of demonstration, because that's how he gets his pun. So it's not that it's inaccurate or loose, it's just the one sees effect that is like a slap in the face for Parmenides. And that's why he uses this. So that's how, so I'm saying there are two possibilities. There could be two strands, there could be a single position. If it is a single position, that's how I join the bits together. And I think you're right, one can put pressure on the demonstration where actually means persuasion. But yeah, cool.
But then the second part is the one that would be a harder case to make, that that's what we're doing right now. I don't think we are trying to slap hermeneutics around anymore.
Yeah.
I think we're more on the first
Yeah.
strand. I think Gorgia is trying to slap us. At least.
Yeah, yeah, the question is, what do we do? You know, I mean, it was a little bit of a provocation. What do we do when we write our academic papers? We try to persuade the community. No? Okay, yeah, yeah. But yeah, okay, but this is an add-on, you know, that I can drop without hurting the paper. So yeah, it's good, Thank you.
No, thank you.
Gracias. Tenemos preguntas más. Edgar Samonia, ¿sí?
Yes, thanks a lot, Anna. This was fascinating talk, as always. And so I just had a question. Well, a couple of comments. One was related to dogs.
Yeah.
Yes. It was that, I mean, when Gorgia says that he's going to prove by dogs, he means that a thing that he's going to prove by using an inherently unreliable cognitive state and problems. So he's going to be using appearance rather than real truth, because that's the tradition in which he's in, right? I mean, for Parmenides, there was the way of truth, that's one thing. There was a way of doxa, which is the way of appearance.
Yeah.
So when he says that, he says, well, I'm going to use that. And then by doing that, he's aware that his method is inherently unreliable.
Yeah.
And actually, he says something like that in number 11.
Yeah.
It says that most subjects, on most subjects, most men make doxa opinion. Their minds advise her.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So most people guide their life by doxa, by inherently unreliable cognitive state, not by knowledge or by wisdom.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm going to give them a proof by doxa, because that's the only thing. The only way I can persuade them.
Yeah.
So
and
actually he says that, but doxa being slippery and unreliable brings a slippery and unreliable success to those who employ it. Right?
Yeah, there is not.
So his success is unreliable, inherently unreliable.
No, but yes.
And so that's what I mean. One thing, and the other thing that was related to that is that at the beginning he says the order or the grace of
the cosmos of the city.
Of the city is that, but the grace of the mind is wisdom.
Yes.
Wisdom is knowledge.
Yeah.
Not doxa. So the grace of the mind is not doxa.
Yeah.
So that's why I thought that in a way his result is self-undermining and
I mean, there is a lot there. So thank you, Edgar, for that. So one thing that would be good to do is to understand what doxa means here, because he says it's slippery and unstable, but you translated it, or in your mind reconceptualized it as appearance, about appearance, and that's not exactly the same thing. So you could have an opinion that is true, but you could have an opinion that is false, and the problem is that is where it's slippery. But that doesn't have a, it doesn't mean being about appearances. You could believe that 2 + 2 is 4, and 2 + 2 is 5. Your belief that 2 + 2 is something is unstable, whatever. But it's not appearance. It's not about appearance. So I wanted to push back a little bit on that and say that. Doxa are unstable, again, like in the Meno, unless they are tied down, for example, with a chain of reasoning. So I think here it's just taking doxa to be opinions, like that maybe true or false, but they are unstable for whatever reason. He doesn't explain why they are unstable, but Plato would say because we have not tied them down or whatever. So he's operating with them, and so he's not operating with the database of appearances. It's operating with a database that is simply unstable with respect to whether it tracks truth or not. So if you accept that, then I wanted to say what it's doing is to apply reasoning on this doxy. And by applying reasoning, I think it wants to do something like, the Socratic elenchus. So, eliminate ones that are not coherent. And so the result is not unreliable. It is just a result that it's a coherent theory of truth rather than a correspondences theory of truth. So I want to push back a little bit there. I think it's interesting that you're saying that the cosmos of the city is knowledge. And he seeming to prize knowledge, there is this little bit of a thought experiment that, if would not be nice if we were omniscient, but we're not, so we have to use doxa as our guide. So it is as if, it seems to me he recognized that maybe this ideal status of being in a state of knowledge, and that would be really the cosmos of the city. But we know the real city is not cosmic in the sense it's not beautiful, it's not ordered in a cosmos. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And equally life, there can be a possible world where the city has cosmos and humans are omniscient, but we're not there, so we operate with beliefs. Yes. Does that help? Yeah.
Yeah, but I was assuming that dogs is not really right. Because belief can become knowledge, not principle. But dogs can never become knowledge.
No,
at least for Parmenides or for Plato. If you are at the state of dogs, that's the end of it. That state can never become knowledge.
Well, but then we need to, so we need to agree on what we mean by doxa here. But even Plato in the Republic, book 5, he would say, you know better than me, that he would say that knowledge and opinion, or doxa and knowledge, are like hearing and seeing. So there is absolutely no common domain between them. So it's not true that opinion can become knowledge. Do you know that text, and do you know what I'm saying? So people think that Plato thinks that knowledge is justified through belief, but there is another part of Plato where he denies that we can never go from belief to knowledge, and I think that would fit the Gorgia's story. Yeah. Okay. More for next time. Yes.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I wanted to ask a little bit about the idea that Gorgias regards his own argument as a plaything and what that might entail exactly. I was thinking about what Claudia was asking about Gorgias's other work, which defends the non-existence of everything, or defends the claim that nothing exists. Yeah. And it reminded me of contemporary philosophers who defend kind of similar claims. So I'm thinking of mereological nihilists, for example, who say that tables don't exist, they're just subatomic particles. Yeah. They tend to say, well, even though that's true, like strictly true, I really believe that there's no such thing as tables. I also think that it doesn't make sense to go about my daily life refusing to talk about tables, Is that what's going on in Gorgias? Is he saying that my argument is true? My argument is good. I agree with its conclusion. It's just that it's not useful to act like that, or it's dangerous to act like that.
I'm not far from what you're saying, Simon. So yes, I think he takes it. It's like a dangerous game, right? I don't know how to put it. It was not easy. Although he wants to show, he presents like, it's a piece of cake. Like, I'm a brilliant rhetorician, so it was a piece of cake for me. So there are multiple meanings in this being a Pygneon. It was a piece of cake for me, so come and study with me and pay the fees. But it was also a plaything, like, don't take it seriously. Why? Because if you follow all the way to its consequences, like Esteban was saying, there is no moral responsibility to be attributed, and society would collapse there. So like play with it, like when you're a young man, get your education, from the sophist for learning how to argue, but don't hold on to it as an adult, mature citizen, because that's untenable, because it's a dangerous thing. So you're saying, well, could it be something that is true, but something that we don't use in our daily life because we need to get on with life? It's not exactly what I'm saying, but it's not distant from what I'm saying. Yeah. Anyway, there are papers upon this topic, like, for example, Stephen Mackey, if you're curious, that's a whole really smart paper on. We disagree, but I think it's a really smart paper on the Pygneon. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask you about the doxa again, but with the relation with Parmenides, because I think, I don't think like Edgar that it's apparent, because, but I think maybe these proposals about doxa, like not only opinion, but doctrines, like doctrines. Let me think.
You could say in Spanish if you like.
Well, sí, mejor. Entonces, en esta relación que hay con las doxa y de Parménides, de las doxa y autor, que no serían forzosamente opiniones cualquiera, sino que corresponden a una explicación fenomenológica y que de hecho en la segunda parte, Parménides, hay quienes proponen que en realidad él está presentando su propia doxa sobre la realidad física, ¿no? Que sería diferente a la primera de una explicación ontológica, ¿no? Entonces, en ese sentido, sí, eso es un poco como lo está tomando Gorgias. ¿Y cuál sería porque hay una diferencia en Parménides? La persuasión es parte de la aletheia.
Ok.
En cambio acá, o sea, parecería que las doxa y en Parménides no son persuasivas, ¿no? En cambio en Gorgias, la persuasión juega como un papel para convencer, aunque en realidad no corresponde a la a la realidad o a la explicación última, ¿no? Tomar un poco en eso.
If I understood you correctly, I think, what you're saying is interesting. I basically think that, yes, so you could think that Parmenides thinks that doxa is an account of the phenomena in the world, and that in a sense is part of truth, but not the truth about the principles or something like this. You could, but so you're saying, you are asking, is there a contrast here with Gorgias? Because Gorgias' doxa seem to be not true, not part of truth. And I'm saying, I think Gorgias doesn't commit to whether these doxa are true or not. They are just beliefs. And the only thing we can do with them is to put them together through reasoning and see if we have a coherent picture. So it's not assuming that they're true or false. It's just saying, well, I don't know, like that's all we have to access the world. And in that sense, it's different. Gorgias is also different from Aristotle, would say, well, not all doxa are the same. There are the endoxa, which are the good ones, and then there are the doxa of people that we don't pay attention to because they're, I don't know, biased or whatever, So does that help?
Aunque creo que quizá Parménides ya está un poco endoxa en esos doxas, porque también son, o sea, hay quienes proponen que en realidad no está hablando de las opiniones, sino de opiniones, de propuestas específicas con quien quiere discutir.
That's good,
e incluso buscan encontrar a quienes estaría criticando Parménides.
I see what you mean. The other thing that would be interesting, so thank you for that, would be to, I think a contrast would be drawn, maybe, I don't know if better or worse, but with Heraclitus as well, So I think that's the other obvious thing that, this is like literally the first time for this paper, but I think it'd be interesting to fill out a little bit epistemology, the history of epistemology. So, Parmenides had that conception of doxa, Heraclitus, that conception of doxa, Protagoras, for example, and then there is Gorgias, and so whom does it really respond to, So I accept the point that it could be finessed here.
Y en estos, por ejemplo, en estos 4 argumentos que decías que hay para defender a Helena, y que serían unas doxa, y no cada una sería una doxa distinta, si no había alusiones como específicas con quien se pudieran conectar, o sea, como que estuviera aludiendo a pensadores específicos.
So there are 2 tragedies by Euripides about Helen, the Trojan women, and I can't remember the other title. So are you asking me if there is anybody that is making reference to? Yes. So there is Sappho who talks about Helen. And there is
que si en los argumentos, o sea, pareciera que está criticando, porque al final es un juego, ¿no? O sea, dice, voy a mostrar que se puede defender a Helena con las doxas. Si esas doxas estaría aludiendo a algún pensador.
I don't, yeah, I understand. I don't know. I think that's a safe answer. But if you're interested, there are the two tragedies where there is Akiba talking to Menelao, arguing for why Helen is blameworthy. And she wins again, like she proves that Helen was blameworthy in the tragedy. And then there is Sappho, who also says, I think Sappho's, I should have said this to Ricardo, Sappho has a poem that starts with like, love is a thing that is compulsive, like love, you see the object of love, you're compelled, okay? And look at Helen. So she, I think, provides the material for this case that love acts as this force. But I think we, like you were saying, as philosophers, would like to see it a more physicalistic way in order to make sense of why love is so mechanically determining the outcome.
Bueno, ya estamos por la hora. Muchas gracias por venir y los que están en línea también. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Gracias, gracias.